See if
Okay.
he, Aaron, you just want to check if he wrote you? Hey, Bridget. How you doing? Do you want to just text him and see if he's...
Oh, I think I should be on this side so they can see him better. Right?
Oh, I didn't turn it on yet.
What's our timeline?
I'm just a very good friend and his wife are coming, and I'm having dinner with them afterwards. So, all right, we'll give him...
He's going to be in big trouble.
I mean, if he's much later...
Yeah.
While we're waiting, I want
Yes.
to pick with you.
Oh,
Zibby.
sure.
Always loved you.
Oh, thank
I
you.
love your book shop. I love
Thank
the
you.
people have and the energy you bring.
Thank you. That's so nice. Appreciate that. Lovely. Thanks. Okay, we'll go with that. I thought about it, but there's not much room, right? I mean, and I was like, could I just put in a Keurig machine or something?
That
No,
is
but how can you-
awesome. Please keep them coming. Period.
That's interesting. I like it. I like it. All right.
Let me see if Aaron. So how funny is it? Your husband
I know.
and
So
my
crazy.
producer partner just met.
I know. Small world.
They live. They're in Kingman. It's Kingman, Little Santa Monica Canyon,
Oh,
Kingman Street. So they're in this neighborhood all the time. Aaron, did you hear from him? Lopes, did you hear anything from him? I don't know if we should start without him or. Yeah.
I can do a really slow introduction.
Let's do it. No, don't worry about it. They'll get here. All right, it's 6:05. I think we're good.
Okay. So this will be you, unless you'd prefer
I'm
this
over here.
out.
No, this is totally
I
good.
feel like that's better.
Yep.
I don't know. I think you'll see more people. Okay. There's one more seat here. People want. There's one seat here. There's a seat right here. If you want to sit here. No. Okay. She obviously doesn't. Okay. Okay. I just feel like a kid in these seats.
Yeah.
Swinging
yeah.
my legs.
Right.
Obviously, your legs are longer. But, yeah, you can. You want to sit right here? Yeah. We do. Otherwise, it looks sad and empty. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay. How do we get everyone's attention? All right, welcome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Can you see me? I know. Anyway, thank you so much for coming to Zibby's Bookshop tonight. So exciting to have Ed Burns here talking about his novel. So excited. Yay!
Thank you for coming.
Okay, let's jump right into it, and we'll tell you more about the bookshop and some, logistical things at the end. But basically, after this, Ed's going to go back there to sign so that anybody who wants to buy his book, not to be too forward, but I just know you're going to love this conversation so much that you're going to want to come up here and buy it, and then you can line up against this wall and meet us back there. Is that straightforward enough? Okay, now the fun stuff. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. First, I just want to say thank you to you for having me on the podcast and helping push the book, but also thank you to everyone who's here supporting your bookstore, because if you know me, you know I come from the indie film world. And when I got into the business 30 years ago in '95, there were a lot of independent and art house theaters. All right, in my section of Long Island where I grew up, on Sunrise Highway, there were 3 theaters between Valley Stream and Rockville Center, if anyone knows that. All those theaters are gone. All right, and we all know, anyone who grew up loving indie cinema, that it's dying on the vine, and it's tougher. Hey, David, how you doing? It's tougher and tougher to find. It's tougher and tougher to get those movies made, and they don't play in theaters anymore. So when the publisher of this book, 7 Stories, they're a smaller indie publisher. They said, we want to put you out on a book tour, but you're only going to independent bookshops. So as someone who, there you go. So as someone who kind of came up in the indie scene in another medium, the minute they said that, I was all in. So again, thank you for having this place, and thank you for all you for showing up and supporting.
Oh, thank you. I'll just keep you here every night saying
There you
this, to greeting everybody at the door, encouraging everyone to come back. How did you pick, by the way, 7 Stories as a publisher? Was it because they were also independent, or how did that happen?
No, kind of like most of the films I've made, it was hard to get this published in the way it's hard to get films financed. The first version of this book I wrote during COVID, and and I'll get into sort of how it changed and all that. But the first version was probably close to 375, 400 pages. I had an agent. We went out with the book, and we got decent feedback back. But it was basically, look, we really like the book. He clearly can write. He's a storyteller, but it has no spine. There isn't enough of a narrative drive. So the book went nowhere. Then I did so I put the book on the shelf. Then I did coming out of COVID, I did 2 seasons of a television show. If anyone saw a show called Bridge and Tunnel, it was a great show. We did 2 seasons of that. I had the 3rd season written. We thought for sure we were going into production. Then we get the dreaded phone call. Not happening. No 3rd season. I'm pissed off. I'm pissed at the business. I don't want to start another screenplay. And I thought, why don't I go back to the novel? All right. So I pick up the manuscript of the novel. And the great thing that happens when you spend 2.5, 3 years away from something you've written is you no longer remember how many hours you dedicated to it, how hard it was to write that scene. You just know whether or not in a screenplay, the scene, or in this, a chapter or a sequence or a passage is good or not. And I quickly went through that, and I was just like, okay, cut that, cut that, cut that, cut that. And what I recognized was there were 2 different books that I had written. And this is a long answer.
Go ahead.
A full long answer?
I don't even need
Just
to
gonna
ask
get
any
into it?
questions. Go ahead.
All right,
I'll just
all
sit
right.
here. This is fine.
All right. So there were 2 books. The book I thought I was going to write was a book about a 12-year-old kid and his group of friends and the adventures they were going to have in the summer of 1980 as a look at sort of the last generation of latchkey kids who had no adult supervision. I grew up on Long Island, working class kid. Both of my parents worked. They left the house at 7:30 to go to work. I did not see them again until 6:30 at night. And me and my friends didn't see any adult until 6:30 at night. We didn't go to camp. We were kids. We didn't have jobs. So we just fucked around the neighborhood and tried to keep ourselves entertained. So I thought, and we got into enough good, fun trouble that I thought that would make for an interesting coming of age story. My thinking was, Stand By Me without the dead body. All right. So, what I discovered was I'll get into the whole thing then. So I'm writing that book during COVID, right? And during COVID, my parents are trapped down in Florida, unable to get back to Long Island. My mom had just gotten out of the hospital. She wasn't well. So after about a week of talking to them, what'd you watch on Netflix? What'd you have for dinner? And just kind of killing time, I decided I would start to every day, I would call it with one specific question. What do you remember about the day you graduated high school? What do you remember about, your first job in Manhattan? What do you remember, when, I should tell you this, my dad was a New York City cop. My mom worked at the FAA, JFK. The characters, the parents in this book, New York City cop, and the mom works for the FAA, JFK. So a lot of it is from my life. But anyhow, so I'm talking to my mom, and I ask her these specific questions. And then I'm going upstairs to write. And suddenly the book is turning into sort of 2 novels, a story about this kid and his friends, but it's turning into this other book, which is who discovers that his mom is unhappy. He doesn't understand what depression is. He also sees that his parents don't laugh the way they used to, and they appear to be heading towards divorce. And he also is the last mama's boy on Marlborough Road. And he knows this is the summer. He's going to turn 13 on the last day of summer. He has to break up with his mother just when she needs him most. So that is what the book kind of morphed into. So back to the initial question, I then got the book. I got rid of all the kids, kept it about the mother-son story. was walking through my neighborhood in Tribeca with a buddy of mine, and we walked past 7 Stories, which kind of looks like an artist's loft on the ground floor with just books all over the place. I've walked past it with my dog for 20 years. I never knew what it is. I asked my buddy, what the fuck is this place? And he said, oh, that's a small publishing place. My buddy Dan Simon owns it. Long story short, I get the book to Dan Simon, and he saved the book. He rescued the book. And that's a good story too. This is gonna be the longest answer
This
to
is
your
great.
first question.
You know what? It's great. I'm tired. I'm
All
just
right,
gonna
good,
kick
good,
it
good,
and
good.
listen
All
to you.
So Dan reads the book, and again, he only knows me as an actor, but he doesn't know me, so he doesn't know what kind of guy I am. And he says, "Why don't we have a meeting? I finished the book." And he's like, "Look, you're going to be okay with some kind of constructive criticism?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. I've never written a novel before. This is brand new. If you were an executive at a studio, and I've been in the business for 30 years, it might go differently, but I've never written a novel before, so please tell me what you think." He says, "All right, when I read the first third, I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm never going to publish this. But you're a friend of Will's, so I have to finish it." Reads the second third, and he said, "Oh, okay, maybe there is something here." And then he said, when I read the third, I was like, I'm going to publish this kid's book. This kid, all right? He's like 4 years older than me. I'm going to publish this guy's book. And he said, and what happened was, you're a first-time writer. So I could see you trying to show the world that you can write prose. And the first third was so overwritten. The middle, you started to find your voice a little. By the last third of the book, you stopped giving a shit about the writing, and you became a storyteller. So he said, what we're going to do is we got to figure out how to get the first 2/3 as good as the last third. One of the things we did, if anyone has read the book, the first chapter about Pop McSweeney's wake used to be the third to last chapter in the book. He's like, that's the best chapter in the book. It's the most well written. Let's open with that. So he gives me a bunch of other notes. I then do the second draft in Dan's style. I get an email back. You have made this so much worse.
Oh no!
All right? But that's okay, because most second drafts of first-time novelists are terrible. Don't worry, we can fix this. And so I got lucky. I was lucky enough to work with a really good editor who helped me craft this thing and find the story in it. And I had to cut some things that I really adored, but I'm happy that I worked with him, and kind of that's how it happened.
So what's something you really adored that you're sad is not in the book?
I would say there's about 200 pages of stuff that I adored, which is why I'm already working on the second book in a trilogy.
Oh, okay.
So since I got rid of that initial Stand By Me kind of thing, I would say from the 220 pages that I cut, there's probably 80 to 100 that were pretty good. So I'm using that as sort of the launching off spot for the second book.
I was going to say a whole nother book of the reject material might not be the best way to start.
Yeah. It's not that. Yeah.
So it's hard to kill your darlings,
Yeah.
but you mentioned already how you have a character of the mom who's depressed in the book, which I find really interesting, particularly because you tell it from a young boy's point of view. And what do our kids really notice about us, right? Do they know when we're upset about world events or whatever else? And can I just read this one line where you start talking about it, you say, something has been going on with my mom. She's down in the dumps almost every day. There's the normal sadness she gets when she talks about her childhood and all the things that are different now. But this summer seems different. And it started even before Pop died. My dad says it's nothing to worry about. That's just the Irish in her. We've got no talent for happiness, he says. Tell me about that. Did you feel that way about your mom at times? How do you tap into the voice of someone who's so much younger?
All right, so two answers there. One is, I think, and again, it's based on my mom, but it isn't my mom, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But that line, my dad did say and continues to say, whenever we meet, like a melancholy Irish friend, usually at the end of the bar, he's got no gift for happiness. But getting into the voice of the kid. Because I'm a screenwriter and had never written a novel before, and quite honestly was very insecure about it and had no confidence that I could do it, the very first pass, the first 6 chapters, I wrote in journal form. So it's the kid's diary, basically. And, I write dialogue. So I kind of, I thought, well, that'll be an easier way to kind of find my way into this. When I did write it, like I said, I wrote it during COVID. My son at the time was 14. I coached his AAU basketball team. So I, had spent the last 3-4 years with like 6 12-year-olds in an SUV driving 3 hours to upstate New York to a basketball tournament and back. So like I had their voices in my head, and like 12 is an interesting point because like they're still little kids, but they're kind of testing out, like some version of like manhood or stepping into their teenage selves. So that was kind of pretty fresh in my head. Like I could almost, I could write a line and be like, okay, would they say that? No, that's a little too sophisticated or insightful. So that's kind of how I think I was able to find the kid's voice. Then after those 6 chapters, though, I realized, all right, I think I think I can handle this, and that's when I attempted to sort of write proper prose, if you will. So
Interesting. Oh my goodness. You have another part in the book where you're talking about the importance of the sense of smell, and I think a lot of times in books that really hit you hard, like your book, there's the sensory emotions that it evokes and all of that. And you wrote again, now I'll stop quoting, but you said, it's a funny thing with smells, how they can take you back to a time and a place. The smell of fish, Pop McSweeney's pipe, and my mom's perfume all do that to me. I don't know what brand she wears, but if some lady in a store is wearing that same perfume, it always reminds me of this one day years ago when she dragged me into the city to go shopping with her at Macy's to buy my dad a Father's Day gift. I really didn't want to go because what kid wants to go shopping with their mother? Tell me about some memories, some sense memories and smells that you associate with sort of growing up in Marlborough Road and that whole sort of time of life.
All right. So to answer that, I'll kind of tell you sort of, I can speak to how much of the book is fact and fiction, because a version of that story because it's connected to the sense of smell. So like when I was writing the book, I said I was talking to my mom, and there are 3 examples in the book of stories that she told me. And the first one I'll tell you is I ran upstairs immediately and just wrote it word for word as well as I could remember it. Right. The second one was 3 or 4 different conversations that I kind of pieced those together into another sequence in the book. That third one you're mentioning is there were 2 things, like that sense of smell and my mom's perfume. I have a very, like when I think of that, I remember being with her on the Long Island Railroad coming back from the city. And at the end, like I lay on her lap as we're going back. Right. And that smell like would just take me there. So, and again, I don't, when you're writing, I wasn't thinking of that memory, like that just kind of came through the process. You've written a novel, like the beautiful journey that you're on when your imagination and the characters and the story take you to a place you didn't anticipate. That third part was more from kind of like snapshots as opposed to memories. Like if you have a picture you see of yourself when you're little and you think, is that a memory, or is that a memory because I've seen that photograph? Right. So in that sequence, a couple of things happen. We take the train into the city, we go to Macy's, and I never did this with my mom, but she would say it. In the book, we walk up Fifth Avenue because it's the most beautiful street in all the world. All right. And we stop at Tiffany's and we look in the window and she looks at a necklace and she says, Edward, one day you're going to buy that for me, or something like that for me. She never said that, and I never got her anything from Tiffany's. All right. Terrible disappointment. Not too well, it is, sadly. But then we walk into Central Park and we feed the ducks. And she talks about looking up at the buildings on Fifth Avenue and the penthouses and says, oh, God, when my girlfriends and I were in high school and we'd eat lunch in Central Park, we'd look up there and say, one day that would be the life we'd have. Those were all parts of different conversations I had with her during COVID. So I kind of used some of those. But then the other thing that kept popping into my head was like my mom was very attractive. And, like there are moments I can remember where like guys smiling, guys saying hello, guy whistling on the street in Manhattan, and that being a very weird thing for a kid, right? So those are all the little tiny pieces. So that sequence in the book, none of it happened and all of it happened, but it didn't happen like that. The story that she told, that was like sort of, again, like coming from a big Irish family, I make this joke, like I come from a long line of storytellers, and I'm the first one who figured out how to get paid to do it, So like it was competitive at any family event, at the dinner table, whoever could hold court, tell the best story, get the most laughs, and do that sort of thing. And then as you got older, that was in the bars, right? And you'd have to try and keep that going. So this is a story I have heard my whole life, but I heard like little pieces of it, and I finally asked my mom. So her father came over from Ireland in 1936 with his wife and my mom's two older brothers. My mom was born in the South Bronx. Her little brother Patrick is born in the South Bronx. Her mother dies shortly after Patrick is born. All right. As my dad said, poor Pop McKenna, uneducated, drunk, patty off the boat with no job and 4 babies. What do? Put the kids in an orphanage, go back to Ireland and try and find a new wife, which is what he did. All right. So my mother and her brothers were sent to the orphanage. He comes back without a wife, but he gets the kids out of the orphanage. And again, like she didn't give me exactly how long they were there. She didn't want to talk about the orphanage, but she talked about that and she loved Pop McKenna. Right. So he gets them out and she would then talk about, oh, you should have seen it on a Sunday when your father and I were first dating. Your father would drop me off at the apartment and come upstairs. And as we're walking up the stairs, you could hear the fiddle and the banjo going and all the old micks are up in the apartment and they're dancing in the kitchen. They're all drunk and crazy. And I would go up there and I'd dance with my father and your father would sit in the corner like, who the hell are these crazy people? Because he's Irish, but not Irish like us. So that was, how she would, and with the excitement that I just kind of give, that's how she would speak about Pop. But the story she told was on payday. So my grandfather was a binge drinker, which means he'd go on a 2-week binge. And on payday sometimes, he would take my mom on the 3rd Avenue L down to 42nd Street, go to the Immigrant Savings Bank, take out the money, and then they would hit every Irish bar between 42nd Street and 86th Street, put my mom on the bar, he'd have a drink and sing a song. Let's go, Molly, we're going to the next one. And they would do that to 86th Street. At that point, whatever money was left, he'd give half of it to my mom and say, take that home to your brothers and make sure, these are to her older brothers, and make sure they get to school and they have their uniforms on, because if the nuns find out, you're going back to the orphanage. So she tells me that story, which is nuts. So that's in the book, right? So that's in the book. The other story that is a fun story about that, but again, you asked about my mom's sort of sadness and maybe where it comes from. You know where it comes from, right? After you hear that story. She tells, one of the questions I asked was, I said, so what did you think when Dad said he was going to take the cop test and become a cop? She said, I thought to myself, well, there goes that dream. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Where there goes that dream? He says, well, I grew up poor. I'm going to stay poor. We're going to be like a working class family. Like, my girlfriends and I sitting in Sunset Park dreaming about the penthouse. It's off the table now. Never going to happen. And, to hear that in your 50s when things have worked out for our family, not such a devastating story. In the book, I tell it that the 12-year-old kid overhears it. He overhears it at a restaurant in Manhattan called Donahue's, which is on, if anyone knows, it's like 64th and Lex. My mom went to an all-girls Catholic high school on 65th and Lex. So another story, asked her, what do you remember about your high school graduation? She says, my father came and picked me up, and then afterwards we went to Donahue's and we sat at the corner of the bar by the window, and I had my first beer with my dad. And then she said, but I also didn't tell him, but I drank in that bar with my girlfriends long before that. So growing up, my dad was a cop. We'd do the St. Patrick's Day parade. Afterwards, we would go to Donahue's because Donahue's was near the 19th precinct, which is where my dad had worked for a time. So in the book, the story is after the St. Patrick's Day parade, the fictional family goes to Donahue's. The mother character is at the bar, the 12-year-old. Of course, he's the mama's boy. He's hanging by her. And another woman asks, what do you think when your husband went on the job, what became a cop? And she says, I said, there goes that dream. And the kid in the story is so furious because he doesn't understand why doesn't she like their life, because he loves their life, and why can't she be happy, and why does she keep wishing that things would be better or different. So, and he's also got a complicated relationship with alcohol, and he vows he's never going to drink because he sees all the bad shit that can happen with his family and booze. But he's so pissed at his mother, he grabs a beer off the bar, he goes under a table where all the other kids have stolen beers and are drinking, and he basically says, I don't care if I hurt my mom's feelings tonight, and he has his drink. So again, 5 pieces in that story happened, but not the way I told it in the book. So when my dad reads it, now for the 3rd time, first time he's like, why didn't you just call it a memoir? I said, Dad, you were there for all of this shit. I made most of it up. I mean, he's like, yeah, but the guy's a cop and blah, blah, blah. So finally, after reading it the 3rd time this week, he finally gets it. He's like, oh, I see what you did here. Interesting. He goes, but I have one question for you. There's a scene at the end where the father, the kid, the whole book, the kid wants to ask his parents, why aren't they happy anymore? And are they going to get divorced? Finally, at the end of the book, he musters up the courage to ask his father, Dad, are you and Mom going to get divorced? And his father looks at him and is like, he's crazy, and said, look, no, first of all, we're Catholic. And you got to think like marriage is kind of like having a bum leg. All right? So you have 2 options. You can cut the leg off and have a peg leg, or you can stay together and choose to walk with a limp. And your mother and I have chosen to walk with a limp. All right? And he goes, Edward, I don't remember ever saying that. I was like, yeah, because I made it up like everything else in the book for the most part. So anyhow, that's kind of how I piecemealed these stories together.
Oh
So.
my gosh.
But it's funny, but he didn't say, I would never say that. He said, I don't remember saying that, but I would have never said that.
Yeah, true.
You have a whole storyline in the book as well about brothers and
Yep.
the importance of the effect of when one brother starts to stray
Yep.
and one of the brothers in the book acts out and gets into the teenage antics that they do, and how that affects when one person sort of goes rogue in a family. How does that affect all of the other relationships and all of that? So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, one of the things I wanted to do, and clearly I didn't do a good enough job, was I didn't want anyone to think that it was my family, right? So I have an older sister and a younger brother. So the protagonist of the story is probably, it's a little bit me, it's a little bit my brother, it's a little bit my father when he was that age and some of the stories that he told. And it's also probably a little bit of my son too, and my daughter, so that it's kind of, they're all in there. The character of the older brother, I have several people close to me who, lost their lives to booze and drugs. And, it all started around the time they were 15, 16. You look back and it was like, oh yeah, that's when, the train started to go off the tracks. And again, because my kids were at that age, I was probably writing some version of a cautionary tale. So that's kind of where it came from. So, I was lucky, that I didn't experience that in my family, but some very good friends and some family, you see what that can do to a family when one kid is really going, off the rails. And, a lot more in the second book. That is something that I'll explore even further. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have your kids read the book?
My daughter has, and she gave me a great compliment. She's like, Dad, like I'm reading it. And then I'm like, she's like, I'm forgetting that you wrote this. She's like, it's just this kid. And then I stop and it makes me think. And I'm like, wait a second, this is nuts. My dad wrote this about this kid. So, so my son will probably listen to the audiobook. Like a lot of my friends, quite honestly.
So I've heard that when you go from novel writing to screenwriting, it is a hugely helpful exercise because you realize how much you actually don't need to say in a scene to move the story forward. But coming as a screenwriter to novel writing, was it hard to sort of buffer up some of the momentum with other like descriptive stuff? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. For me, it was an interesting process because I make indie films, partly out of necessity and now just out of habit, like I am kind of handcuffed by my budgets. So when I write, as I write a scene, a lot of times I say, I can never afford to shoot it that way. So let me rewrite it. So, and, I do smaller character driven stuff. So that's kind of, my canvases can only be so big. When I started writing this, again, I wasn't thinking of that bigger canvas, but the minute I kind of allowed myself to, and again, I should say where this story originally came from was, when I'm in film school, I see Truffaut's 400 Blows. For me, that was one of those movies where it just blew my mind. And I was like, that's why I want to make movies. And I was always like, I'm going to make that kind of coming of age story, from my generation. And I just never got around to it because it's a little daunting. And then when COVID hit, I thought, oh, this is the time. I've got a little bit of time. I felt I was at a good enough place where I could probably tell a period film set in 1980 and get that money to make that movie. And then my producing partner, Aaron, who's here, we were talking about COVID and when will we ever be able to be back on set due to social distancing. And there were talks we may not be able to do anything for 2 years. And then I had this notion going all the way back to high school. And I should tell that story about my English teacher, Miss Maxwell, but we can get to that, but I'll stay on track, I promise. And what was I saying? Oh, yeah, so COVID. So I was like, oh, you know what? I've always kind of wanted to write a novel. Maybe I should try my hand at this. This would be the time. And then the minute I started, the fact that, it didn't have to be dependent on dialogue, the fact that I could get into a character's head, the fact that, I started to fall in love with putting you in the room and all the little details. You mentioned smell, touch, little things like that. Those are things you don't include in a screenplay. It really was liberating, which is probably why it was, that first draft was 400 pages. And I love this process so much. I'll always do both. It was a great gift for me to not have to worry about when a screenplay is done, saying, all right, let's fly out to LA and see if we can, go hat in hand and get this thing made. To be able to just kind of have it done and, so.
If that sounds like anyone's car, feel free to walk out. Okay, whatever. Thank you. Okay, universe. What is going on in the film world for you these days? Wait. Mrs. Maxwell.
Oh, Miss Maxwell. Okay, right.
And then film.
So Miss Maxwell, it's funny. I just did one of these last night at a place called Godmothers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Jennifer, who owns that place, was talking about like the godmothers are like women in your life who water and nurture seeds, right? And after I told this story, she said, oh, you've had a bunch of godmothers. So when I was, and this is in the book, when I'm in the 6th grade, if you went to a Catholic school, you'd have your English class, you'd have to write a poem about Jesus. Okay. No one wants to write a poem about Jesus. Certainly I didn't. But I write this poem, and unfortunately, Sister Paul Francis thinks that it's so wonderful, she's going to submit it to the Catholic Daughters of America Poetry Contest. And it then wins first place on Long Island. So a couple of terrible things happen in the wake of that. I get a trophy that's bigger than any sports trophy I have. Then, if you, in the 1970s, in my town on Long Island, if you read poetry, write poetry, win a poetry contest, you're going to get your ass kicked. So walking down the hall at school, there was no shortage of dead legs and smack to the heads and headlocks and all that stuff. But the good thing that came from it was my dad immediately, there was never any talk about me becoming a cop. It was like, you're going to be a writer. All right. Which is very different for like the story of a working class dad, right? Get the job with the benefits and do that. He's like, you can write, you're going to be a writer. I go to high school. I don't give any thought to being a writer. I'm just a fucking moron in high school, right? And we have a creative writing class with Miss Maxwell. I write a short story. She hands it to me after class. She goes, I need to talk to you after class. I'm like, oh shit, I must have fucked up somehow, right? I'm like, so anyhow, I meet with her. She's like, what are you thinking about doing in school next year? I was like, I quite honestly have no idea. I haven't given it any thought. She's like, this is what you should do. Like, you can write. Like, you should be a writer. So that's the second person in my life who said, you should do this. So at the end of the school year, she comes up to me and she says, hey, we have this magazine we do at the end of the year for all the seniors. So if you're a painter, poet, or you sketch or photography, we do like this magazine for the arts. And I'd love for you to include your short story. And thinking back to the beatings I got in the 6th grade, I said, absolutely not. She's like, Eddie, come on. I really think that we should publish this. And I was like, all right, how about this? You can publish it, but just put author unknown. All right, don't put my name on it. And then it's a win-win. She says, done. All right, it's the last week of school. And all of a sudden these girls are coming up to me like, oh my God, Eddie, I didn't know you were so sensitive. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, your story about the old guy. I was like, and I look at it and Miss Maxwell put my name on it.
Oh, no.
So that's, she's really the one who I'm like, I go to school as an English major because of Miss Maxwell. And the funny thing is, like, years later, so about 10 years ago, I wrote like a book called Independent Ed about like like a how-to or how not to do book about indie filmmaking. Out in East Hampton, they have this book fair and everybody's outside on their desks and signing their books. And a woman comes up and she's like, Edward, how are you? Do you remember me? I look at her, I say, no. She goes, really? I look at her, I'm like, Miss Maxwell? And she's like, no, it's Dr. Maxwell now. And the first chapter in my book is called Thank You, Miss Maxwell. And it's a telling of the story that I just told you. I'm like, that's incredible. So like, obviously you read the book. That's awesome. She's like, no, I just picked up my copy. I'm like, look at the table of contents. Like, she looks at it, she's like, oh my God, this is incredible. I said, well, why are you here? The arrogant actor asks, why else would this woman be here other than she goes, because I'm with my book. So anyhow, it was I hadn't seen her since high school, so that was great. I have no idea what the question was. What were we talking about?
No, that was great. I love that story. You were going to talk about what was new with your film career now.
Oh, yeah. All right. So, so we just came back from TIFF, Toronto Film Festival. We had a movie there called Millers in Marriage, which came from, I'm 56. I came up in the indie film scene in the 90s. And back then, we had so many character-driven films made about us in our 20s, the Gen X indie film scene. But now that we're in our 50s, there are no films about us.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of friends who had become empty nesters. I'm now an empty nester. So that was something I was really interested in exploring. And then also I have a lot of friends in the business or in the film business or writers in the music business. And we're all kind of at a place as you hit middle age. Some folks are like, well, do I have anything left to say? Or have I gotten complacent because I had a nice career and I can just coast now? Or if I do have something to say, does anybody give a shit? And if they do give a shit, can I still get the record deal to reach my audience? So those were kind of the things that were bouncing around my head. So the movie takes a look at 3 siblings, 2 sisters, Gretchen Mole and Juliana Margulies, and I play their brother. And we're all in the arts because our parents were musicians and we kind of went that way. And it also stars Patrick Wilson, Ben Bratt, Minnie Driver, Brian Darcy James, Morena Baccarin. So like great cast. And played to great reviews in Toronto. So hopefully that'll come out before the end of the year. There you go. And then my other big film news is I just finished the script for the sequel to Brothers McMullen.
Oh my God.
So that's what I got going.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's fun.
Very
fun.
exciting news.
Yeah.
What is being an empty nester like?
I've been on the road this whole time. So my wife is kind of dealing with like really having an empty nest, right? She's home alone with the dogs. But I'm hearing from her a lot more on the phone than I ever have before. So I think we're both in that place. We're like, what the fuck is going on? So.
Oh, amazing. Well, can we open it up?
Let's
for a
open
couple
up
questions?
to Q&As. Yeah. Got
And
hot in
just
here.
one, I know, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
We can put the air conditioning back on. Well, for questions, make sure it's a question. That's my only advice. Don't. Yeah, okay, just like an actual question. Yes, go ahead.
When are you gonna make this into a movie?
Great question.
When am I going to make it into a movie? Quite honestly, I had such a good time not thinking about that story as a movie that I have no plans to. I don't even want to think about it. What I would rather do is let me write I'd like to write the 2 next books in the trilogy and then see what that piece looks like. And then maybe, who knows, maybe that's a series. So it's kind of where my head is with it.
What was a hard screenwriting habit to break when you were writing your prose?
Not relying on dialogue, right? It's easy to write dialogue. So it can be a little bit of a crutch. So I would say that was one of the things that just making sure I can tell the story in another way. Also, kind of a traditionalist. So not sweating the 3-act structure so much. That was when Dan Simon, the editor and publisher, was like, put that story first. I kind of my head had to really get around that for a while. But then interestingly, the film that we just made, Millers in Marriage, has a non-linear story now. So it kind of jumps around time-wise. And I know it was a direct result of writing the novel and sort of falling out of love with having to tell the story in linear fashion. Yeah.
Who are storytellers that have influenced you or novelists that you read everything?
This will be kind of an odd one because it was a memoir, but this was a book that I adored when I read it back in the 90s. And before doing the audio recording of it, I re-listened to it because I wanted to hear how he handled the kid's voice. But Frank McCourt's Angel's Ashes, and also the whole Irish thing of it. But listening to it again, I kind of oh, when I do the second book,
So good.
there's some inspiration in that. On the film side, my favorite film of all time, and it's another one on the list. I've got all these films on the list that I'd love to make my version of one day. Last Picture Show, the Bogdanovich movie. That's a film that's the one. I mentioned 400 Blows. Billy Wilder's The Apartment was the first film. That's a good story. I should tell you that. So basically, I'm an English major at school, not a great student. My advisor calls me in, another godmother, and says, look, in order to get your GPA up, you should become a film studies minor. I was not a kid who went to the movies or loved the movies or anything like that. Said, watch old movies, write a paper, get an A, get your GPA up. First class I take, first film I see is The Apartment. And I'm blown away. I had no idea that movies could do that they could be that dark, right? And that funny. So after class, I spoke to the professor. I'm like, I have a question. Don't think I'm a moron, but Billy Wilder, what does that mean? He's a writer and a director. I didn't grow up, we didn't know anybody in the movie business. So he told me what that job was, basically. I was like, that's a job? You can do that for your life? You gotta be fucking kidding me. I want in. And that's when I decided that's what I'm gonna do. So.
Why did you decide the trilogy? Was it a natural thing or just because you had a lot of
You know what?
written, or because
When I threw out so many of those bad scenes, there's some good
And
ones.
some great ones.
And some great ones. I kind of had this idea because what I wanted to do, and I mentioned, I made the joke about Stand By Me without the dead body, but that final scene in Stand By Me is a killer, where the group of friends say they have to go their own way and he never sees them again. I can remember having that moment with my friends. I went to an all boys Catholic high school. All my friends went to the public school, and on that last day of summer, there was kind of feeling like, this is over. We're never going to get to do us again like this. So that resonated with me. So that's kind of the book I thought I was going to write. So even though I didn't, I thought, that's the book I wanted to. I was like, I gotta still see if I can tackle that as the second book. And I like the title that I had for that, which is the title of my production company, which is called the Marlboro Road Gang. And we're called the Marlboro Road Gang because in the 70s, when I grew up, our neighborhood had a lot of gangs. And my next door neighbor Stephen and Annie was in the Falcons, and they had a rumble against Kappa Delta Nu on the street corner, and we just thought that was the coolest shit ever. And the Warriors was out, so me and my little friends in the 4th grade, we formed our gang. We had no rumble stuff. So anyhow, so that's the second one. And then I was like, I have to resolve the parents and their divorce issue. So the third book is going to be Goodbye Marlborough Road, where the family leaves the block. So that's the
Sounds like a song.
Yeah. Goodbye Marlborough Road. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, I think we'll go to the book signing now, if that's
Guys,
okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
That was
much.
great. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm
Could
so
listen to
glad
you all day.
you read from the book. I have like PTSD from the nuns.
Oh no. I wasn't gonna make you do that. Oh yeah, I'll watch the whoops. All right, I will.
And then just, Zibby, don't lose the magnet in your shirt.
Yep, just did.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So should I go stand by the ladder? Maybe if we get away with that. I don't think we will.
I mean, she got me. She got me good. Yeah. She's the best. I love it. I remember.
I've got one of them. Can I get one? Thank you. I didn't know if there was mine or. I actually. I already like that audio, but I will read this.
I have Howard Winston, Kelly Smith, and Michael Spindler.
Hi, I'm Natalie. Pleasure. Nice to meet you. I'm so excited. And how did you guys meet? Yoga. I need to go to yoga so badly. So I really miss yoga works here. Now that everything's opened up again and COVID's kind of gone, like I'd really love to see yoga. Just because there was a Q&A with the Marvel person.
It was good. The show is on November 12th, and that'll be a good material by Dolly Alderton.
Okay, great. But I get the emails. I'm sure I'll get it. When it's like a new event. So it's perfect. I won't miss it again. Thank you.